So now imagine you have no sense of touch whatsoever. You can't feel anything, right? You also can't smell anything. Now, if I walk over, I poke your eyes out, where are you? You're sitting in one dimension. The concept came to me as a kid that like maybe you were only experiencing three dimensions because of the senses that we have. I mean, think about it. If you can't see where you are and you can't feel that you're moving, then where are you? You're just like that microcontroller over there. You're just collecting data. You might be reacting and stuff and twitching your muscles, but you don't know that you are. And then so now you understand time is just literally the reflection of the data you saved, which you save at a frequency rate, right? Like we literally run at 120 or so bits a second. Literally, if you kept forgetting every single day, time wouldn't really exist for you. You would just experience. So it's like, I'm looking at this controller right now and I'm thinking about the data, right? That it's collecting and I'm telling it to save it. And it's just adding it up, right? You just think it's numbers. But then you think to yourself, look, like, what does the data look like, right? And I just see this list that's just growing. And then you take that list of data and you throw it into an Excel sheet, and it's like these waves that have peaks and random things. And like, if it was to have a read-through function, right? If I gave that thing the ability to read, because right now it's just writing, it could look back and it would experience time. And time would only move forward because I never told it could delete data. And for us, it's the same. We can't delete data. You can forget things now. Now, forgetting is different. Like, that's simply because we have over 200 petabytes of data and only 120 bits or so a second of resolution, meaning it would take millions of years for us to go through all of it. This is why we have chemical tagging system. We call it emotions, right? That's why if you think back, like, why can't I remember what I had for lunch, a couple Tuesdays ago, or even like today or the day before? Because it's not relevant. You consider, like, what's the difference between this controller and that controller? It's like, oh, well, I gave that one buttons, right? Kind of like how we have buttons. We can't push, right? Because right now that thing's going over there and it'll make certain calculations, it'll add up or subtract down, but only because I'm pushing the buttons and I told it how to respond to those buttons. Yet we respond to things, but where are our buttons coming from, right? Where is that coming from? We don't have, like, you want to call yourself a processing unit, but like if you're a processing unit, then turn off your eyes or ears or turn it up or down. Shut down or program yourself. Why don't you set up a schedule so that way tomorrow at 3 o'clock you're going to experience so and so emotion. Exactly. So before you think to yourself, like, I don't want to be a control unit, when you understand what we do as the controller, you're going to be a pretty proud control unit. Because as this controller, unlike that one that just saves data, or this one that counts up and down, what we got to do is far more important. We may not have this freedom of will to like just will things into our day to day, right? But what we get to do, I think, is better than that. We get to label data. This is what AI has had such a problem doing. How do we get auto data labeling? That's because we are the data labelers. We get to decide through affect, right? Whether or not an experience is good or bad. Here's the one other thing we get to do, right? So we're a controller, we have two things. It sounds limited, but then the other thing that we get to do is action. Go or not to go. So basically, we're a controller controlled by a computer, a CPU. This controller or CPU is our spine, the autonomic nervous system, to be more specific. And so yes, we don't get to control certain things, right? We don't have necessarily freedom of will, but we have the decision power. We get freedom of decision. Now, we don't get to choose what problems we get to decide on. We don't get to choose what two options, but what we do get to do is when we're presented with something, we get to say, I like or I don't like that, affect. We get this as a child, good or bad. And then the other decision we get is to act or not to act. So yes, we don't get to choose our dreams. We wake up, we feel tired, we respond a certain way. A doctor hits your knee with a little hammer, you kick. Affect coupled with the decision to do or not to do, those are fundamentally the two most important things anyone could argue exists, right? To decide where to place something, whether or not you want to do something or not. How does it get any better than that? I would not want to be the processing unit. I want to be the controller. I want to be the one that decide, like, yeah, that's good or that's bad. We're not going to do this. We are going to do this. Because once you make those two actions, those two decisions, redirects you. It's not going to return you back to a situation you keep saying is bad. And so we have the most power with our limited decisions. We get to label the data and we get to make the go, no go. What I see us closest to is at minimum a CPU and a controller that has two different storage areas, but I think it's more likely that we have two different controller units with two different data set You have to understand that we're living a narrative, right? Everyone has their own story. And when you're trying to create AI, we're running into this problem of how do you create this thing that behaves like we do, right? And then you understand that if we have a narrative, what are the fundamentals of every narrative? There's always got to be a protagonist and an antagonist, right? For any story to develop, there has to be someone contrary. There has to be some sort of play back and forth. How do you experience a situation where you know that you did the wrong thing or later regret a decision? So the fundamentals of any equation, right? You can have multiple inputs give you the same output, but you can never have an input give you different outputs. And so understanding that fundamentally, there's no way in which you can write a machine that's going to have this back and forth play like we do, where you can make regrets and not maximize it. And then so now when you consider the fact of the cerebral cortex, right, and how our brain overall is split in two, understand that segregation physically and recognize that we have language on one side and we have more of an emotional harmony, understanding, and logic. And understanding that if we have language on one side, the ability to communicate the rational with the logic, and then how do we experience the other side? How do we experience the emotions, the feeling, the recognizing of your mother's face? Consider what's already known about the brain, right? Whenever a doctor has done certain fMRIs and they'll listen to patients listening to music or playing music, they see all this communication back and forth. Understand that the communication between those lobes of our brain is very important, but they don't talk to each other using words. And also having played an instrument, right? So when you think to yourself, how do you play an instrument, right? If that is going to give me the ability to communicate between both lobes, what is that like? And it's like, well, it's kind of emotional, it's kind of weird, and then you think to yourself, well, what's one of the first things that they tell you to do? You got to keep time. That's a rational, that's a logical thing. And so you'll often be taught, like when I was playing the alto sax, they tell you to keep time with your foot, so you're tapping. And so you understand, it's like, where you're tapping and you're keeping time, that's rational logic, but then the music has to hit in these weird ways. And then when I started playing the drum set, right, like I told myself, because I'd had that experience, I was like, for now, I'm not gonna learn anything. I don't want anyone to teach me, this is how you play this is how you play that. I didn't want to go and like look at what someone else was doing and try to reproduce it. I was like, the drums are just for fun. I'm just gonna get on it, play some music, and I'm just gonna kind of like, just hit the drums and just kind of like let it rip. There were times where like I would just look at my hands. We're like, what the hell was that? So I would sometimes be outside for hours. I mean like 8-9 hours. I'm just out there with this setup, right? And it's an electric drum set. And so I'm like listening to my music. I got the speakers. I'm out there on the drum set. And then sometimes there would just be like tired and I wanted to go to sleep. I would just start falling asleep on the drum set. I would jump up and I would start sprinting because I just wanted to get enough energy that I could just get a little bit more of what that was. What the hell is that? When we try like, when you look down at your hands and you're just like, where the hell did that come from? Like that kind of magical creativity, like, it was just the most amazing thing. And I just couldn't reproduce it. If anyone asked, they were like, do that again right now. I couldn't give that to you again. You have to understand, you have to use both parts of your brain. Both hemispheres are required. And what's the problem with thinking logically or trying to explain something? Something that's explained, something that's logical is on the right hemisphere. So your right hemisphere is trying to figure out what's going on the left side. The side that is literally fundamentally designed to have the opposite type of functionality, right? Not opposing, but the opposite. So that way there is a duality. So when you sit there and you're like, hey, Anthony, reproduce that right now. I'm trying to think of what to do. It doesn't work. So why now and why me? Only two reasons why I'm here for the first time telling you what the meaning of life is. Understand that this has been the happiest time of my life. I lost my job and I haven't had one in a while because I've just been researching things. I'm supposed to be looking for a job, but instead I've locked on to something. Because I had the ability to connect mechanical, electrical, software, materials, and manufacturing engineering, I was able to develop full products, right? Something that senses information, takes in data from the environment, conditions it in a circuit, and then actually having to write the code that takes that data, converts it into something useful, and then applies it back out, right? Driving the circuits, and then actually making the actuators move in the way in which you want them to. So while I have read a lot of books or listened to books on Audible, there are two authors specifically that allowed me to connect the dots. And it was once I had finished Maps of Meaning that I was able to take all the information that I'd learned from Dr. Sam Harris's books and just it clicked. It made so much sense in a different way. So something that is amazing about biology is that while it follows the laws of physics, allowing me to see certain things that don't make sense to others, and then I'll see them like, oh, I see how that could be advantageous right away. I'm like, that's really cool. But then once you look into it further, it always seems to blow my mind. Somehow, it took exactly what I had, it confirmed it, and yet it added this little thing to it that's like, whoa, what simplicity came into this nonsense to make it amazing like this. Dr. Andrea Huberman described us once as a figure-8 system, right? It's not just a system of top down. And once I thought about that, I was like, oh, let me just work my way back down. So I worked my way back down from the brain, back to the spine, right? Finished up the central peripheral. And as I was getting back to the brachial plexus, I had seen something that just made me lose my mind. I couldn't believe it. It just all clicked once I saw the way in which that artery intertwined through the peripheral nervous system, through the brachial plexus. I made this connection that had started this whole thing.